Mute this one though, right? Good evening. Thanks so much for having me. I always like to take a moment. My book's been out for a little over a year, and so I try to just slow down and let you know that like this moment is part of a dream that I had. I don't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, but like eventually, I thought I would like to get to read part of my story in front of people. I know some people have more specific ambitions, like to be president. I never wanted that, but like this was my dream, and so I want you all to know that and to thank you for being here, and really just stop and soak in this moment. So thank you. I'm going to read a little bit about a 5-minute passage. I like to do that just to sort of set the tone for the evening. And the part that I'm going to read is when my son Tofs he has finally made it to the developmental pediatrician. I bet those waits are still really long. Back when we took him, it was a months long wait list to get into this one doctor who I really felt like could solve the mystery of my son. And so this is us. I call him in the book Dr. Perry. Um, and we have gathered our kids. I'm with my husband, and we've gone to the University of Virginia to find out sort of the big answer to what my son is experiencing. When Dr. Perry entered wearing slacks and a button-down, he carried a small black case that resembled a mini backgammon board. Somehow, I believed everything we'd need was packed inside. He sat down, opened the case, and asked Tofs to put the various pieces into place. In the notes, he wrote that Tofs could, quote, reverse the form board. I can't remember exactly what he grabbed next. Was it a plain piece of white paper or a small dry erase board? And thankfully, I didn't know the gravity of the test until it was over. He drew a horizontal line. Can you draw this for me? He asked. Tofs did. Then he drew a vertical line. How about this? Tofs's lines were shakier, fainter, made with a fisted grip, but they were there. Well, that's good news, Dr. Perry said. The fact that he was able to copy those lines means his intelligence is at least on the low side of average. Had he just handed us a life vest or shot a hole through our boat? He finished examining Tofs in about 10 minutes and then sat Paul and me down while Tofs and his sister Elliot played. When I look at his records, the poor growth, carnitine deficiency, history of hypoglycemia, and now global developmental delay, he's got something. We're just not smart enough to figure it out yet. Something global, yet. This wasn't a fluke. Tofs had stumped the best. I processed this much before the tunnel started to narrow. Given your levels of education, he's certainly an outlier. I think he should see genetics again for whole exome sequencing, and he should have every new wave of genetic testing that becomes available. Science is moving so fast, and what we don't know now, we might know in 10 years. Maybe one day somebody in Europe will discover the Christopher syndrome. Every new test, Europe, my boy, as a syndrome. And then, as the conversation wound down, if he were my son, I'd go ahead and schedule a brain MRI. As I sat across from Dr. Perry, I heard outlier as a painful marker of deficit. What did it mean that our son looked small but fine on the outside, yet was struggling to communicate, to understand? What if he was lonely or frustrated or scared and couldn't tell us? What if the world was closed off to him in ways it remained wide open to me? This type of limitation was not what I had imagined for my child, and the painful path between mystery and atypical, which was really no path at all, was not the one I thought I'd travel. The first time I heard the term liminal, I was 18, sitting in an African American Studies 101 class at the University of Virginia. A tall and slender Professor Penningroth, his complexion like my mother's relatives, had written the words middle passage in the center of the blackboard. He walked us through not just the number of black bodies taken or the number of years over which they were stolen, but what it might have been like to be yanked into a void, into a void, to live or die between what was and what would be. Liminal comes from the Latin word for threshold. When your life, your customs, your expectations are ripped away, as in the case of slaves, or if they disintegrate through grief and mystery, you stand at this threshold. On one side, I see the disintegration of my assumptions about myself, motherhood, my children. In the space between, the space of not yet, I tread water while going to doctor's appointments and Googling, while noticing illnesses or quirks or developmental delays, while waiting for the one doctor on the right ship to come scoop us up from the depths. On the other side, who knows? I'd always assumed the other side was an answer, a new set of boundaries, a new territory to navigate and accept. I'm not sure I would know the other side now if it slapped me in the face. How do you recognize the thing you're looking for when it has no name, no shape? Someday, someone in Europe. This space can be relentless in its power to hold my imagination captive, to dash what's beautiful and true to pieces. Because as I sit across from the doctor and hear outlier, as I push off into the deep, I do not think about the way Tofs wakes up early one morning to put together a puzzle all by himself, nor how he intuitively cups my face in his hands and gazes into my eyes. I cannot yet know he is capable of ordering a metal yo-yo off Amazon without any instruction. Because Tofs will think about and do things we would never think of or be able to do at such a young age, or ever. Outlier. Somehow these truths deserve to make it to the other side, even if my hands are heavy with doubt. Moses instructed the Israelites to remember the words of the God who had delivered them from slavery. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. If the great doctor never comes along in his great boat, if I never get to the other side, I want someone to find me. I want them to see every dream for Tofs stamped across my forehead, the names of his gifts written on my forearms. Thank you. My bookmark is an old photo of our family. I can't leave that.
No, definitely can't leave that behind. Your family is absolutely beautiful. You mentioned before reading a passage from the book, and thank you for doing so, that this is what you wanted to do, was to be able to read your book in front of people. And we had a chance to talk briefly before coming down here with all of you. And it was asked, what is it like now that your story is on display for everyone? You know, the story that you and your family have experienced so closely is now shared with everyone. How does that feel?
I think part of it I was prepared for in some sense because I'd written essays about raising Tofs to sort of, both because I needed to write the essays and also just to kind of get a sense of like, how big was this story? Was it deep enough, wide enough for a book? But also what's funny is sometimes you forget what you've that you've sort of, I don't think of this as a diary, but you know, you sort of expose some of your inner thoughts to the world, and sometimes I'll forget what I put in the book. So obviously I remember the main narrative of like going with Toast, but somebody will be like, oh yeah, remember when your husband like proposed over 5 guys? And I'm like, oh, that's right, that's in the book. Or like, you know, how you guys met at the trolley, that was fun, you know, and just sometimes it's just like the little details that I forgot that I put in there. And it's funny to hear like what people pick up on and what they stick to. There's always a little bit of a concern about like, how will my kids feel when they grow up and they read this book? And sort of the line that I've stuck to that is very true for me is that my hope is that Tofs one day reads this book and that to him it feels like a love letter to him. And that's not something I get to control, which is hard. I kind of tell this story and put it out there and pray. I know that some days we might have to have some difficult conversations when my kids grow up and read it. But that is my sort of overarching hope, is that he feels immensely loved by it.
Probably not, right? Probably not. Okay, so you bring readers into your story when Toph is about 22 months old or so, but I want to know how he's doing now. Like what is he
Yeah.
up to?
Toast is so fun and amazing. In some ways, he's like the quietest kid right now. So he's in the middle. He's got Elliot is the oldest girl, and then Toast, and then Juliet is the baby girl. And they really make their voices heard right now in the house. And so Toast has like, it's interesting. It keeps shifting. He's a little bit more quiet, but he like has his Nintendo Switch, and he likes to do. You guys are gonna have to help me. The dance game that you, what is it? Just Dance. Thank
Just Dance,
you.
yeah, okay.
He still is really into Kids Bop. He asked for one of the CDs for his birthday so we can play it in the van over and over again.
For everyone to hear. Okay.
He still is into like his karaoke machine that I got him when he was about 7. He still uses that. So he's still into music. I asked him, excuse me, I have to might grab some water, but I asked him what he wanted me to tell you all, and he basically wanted you to know that like he's doing better. He's on medication, so he's not having seizures anymore, and he's like really happy about that. We all are. And he just wants you to know that he's still like into acting, and he wants to go to New York to go to some sort of acting school that he found online. And he's still really into Amazon and purchasing Legos and things off Amazon. What I didn't mention in this passage, but sort of alluded to, thank you so much, was that once Tophs ordered $500 worth of leather handbags and tablets off Amazon. And so he's still very good at that.
Thank God for the quick return at Kohl's, right? I mean, we can just drop it off at Kohl's or the UPS store and get that right back to the Amazon warehouse where it belongs. Yeah. That's funny. He's a character. I love that you were able to share that update with us. So let's kind of continue on the path of parenthood and all that comes with it, just in general. I think for all the parents in the room, or for those who have cared after a child, there comes so much anxiety with like, am I doing this right? Or like, what if this happens? And worrying about situations, or even finding yourself in like the blame category, where it's like, could I have done this better, or should I have gone to this sooner? Do you feel like when you wrote this that those universal elements were something that everybody could relate to, or like that this was a unique to you type of story?
Oh, sorry. Hi, Julie. I know somebody in Iowa. Stop the program. Sorry. I'm like, wait, what was the question? Okay. So I think I sensed that there were some universal elements, right? Because everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of us have heard of that book, like What to Expect When You're Expecting, right? Nobody thinks that they know everything. But I experienced some of that questioning and self-doubt, I think, so intensely because of the way my brain is wired and because of my anxiety. And so it is helpful to hear other parents chime in and say, me too, like up Googling late at night. And so I can see how those elements are universal. And I could also see where my anxiety definitely plays a role, where my husband, Paul, who like somehow like doesn't have an anxious bone in his body, would be like, time to put that phone down and stop Googling, you know? And so there are parents out there like that. I'm married to one, I guess.
It's so true. I mean, we were talking about this also. It's like having young children, or even dealing with like ailments yourself. You're like, wait, okay, well, the internet says this, that I should call the doctor right away. And, you know, there's somebody who's like the voice of reason who's like, hey, let's think this through, let's process this a little bit. But when you're dealing with what you know, we're going through with Toph, I mean, how could you not stay away from, you know, the internet trying to figure out what's going on?
And like, there's so many symptoms that overlap, right? Like any of us that go to the doctor with something, like there's always a differential diagnosis, I think is what they call it. And so it's so hard because I remember when he wasn't able to sleep, he was like maybe 3-ish, and he would wake up and he just wanted to stare at the computer screen. We had like one of those big Mac like laptops, or not laptops, but desktops. And he would just wake up and he'd be like, video, video. And his eyes were, you know, he has these huge, beautiful eyes. And I remember Googling and being like, oh my gosh, I think he has this thing, because these kids wake up, they have sleep issues. When they get upset, they might bang their head on the kitchen or on a wall, and he had done that in our kitchen. Hard to understand, like what's driving sort of their tantrums. Also, guess what? Tantrums are normal for 2-year-olds. So you're like, what also? And I'm going through this right now. I have a preteen, and there are lots of ideas people have about like what should and shouldn't occur during the teen years. And so you're like, what is going on? Like, do I need to see someone? You know, do I just like let them like listen to music in their room and it'll all like they'll come out when they're 18 and it's fine? I don't know.
Write it down and pass it along to me because we're not quite there yet. I think someone is coming to the rescue with a call.
Oh, thank you.
We just blame.
And it's a Ludens.
Ooh, is it? So it's like the cherry kind?
Yeah.
Those are the best kind.
This is the one my kids eat when we're out of candy in the house, and they're like, I need something.
Cough drop, yes. All right, I'll let you get situated with that as I ask this next question. But yeah, one thing that we often hear as parents, to a much smaller scale compared to what you dealt with, is like, oh, we don't know, we're not sure, and that can be really frustrating. So as you navigated this this season of what you went through with TOEFs, what did you learn about the medical system or the healthcare system that you didn't know before, or that you maybe had a misconception about, or something else?
I think that I am prone to black and white thinking and like Western medicine and all of this. And growing up, for whatever reason, I got strep throat like every day and like pink eye. Like these were my childhood illnesses, not very serious, just kind of annoying. And we always went to the same doctor who had known me since I was born, named Dr. Dottie, and he sat on his black stool. And you know, back then it was like all notes by hand, and he had this big file on me, and it just felt like if I get sick, there's the pink amoxicillin medicine that makes me better. You know, even as I developed anxiety and had panic attacks overseas, which was really terrifying, I went back and eventually we found a good counselor and I got medicine and we did cognitive behavioral therapy. And guess what? Like I got better. Not in the sense of like healed, I never need to do anything again, but I got better. And so to have a child and you've grown up sort of with this black and white thinking and these expectations that doctors know and the white coat is really powerful, it just sort of tore all of that down. I still sometimes am tempted to say, if we go to the right place, if I Google the right thing, it's just like, like take out the and, add plus signs in the search bar, and I can figure this out. Like there's something about me that feels like if I can just get the right elements together, we can get our answer. And everything about TOEFs is like sort of tearing that down. And I think it's okay, but I think it's not natural to my brain and maybe even the way that we practice medicine here.
Let's talk a little bit about your anxiety, something that you dealt with before having kids. And can you talk about how you're dealing with that now and how you dealt with that during this season and managing that or manage? You said that you did do some therapies that helped, not healed,
right? Yeah,
helped that out. So kind of talk about how that was managed.
Yeah, so I first started taking, I'm very open about this, medication for my generalized anxiety disorder when I was about 15 or 16 and started cognitive behavioral therapy, which was really helpful because at that point, I was going to school feeling like something's gonna happen and I'm going to die and I will never see my parents again. Like this was every morning. My mom would drop me off. I'm gonna age myself a little bit here, Jody. When I went to high school, we had payphones still.
Payphones?
See? She's always doing this.
I've seen those in the movies. Yeah.
With a red phone booth. And so I would call my mom panic, like, I'm going to die, I can't breathe. So this was sort of like a daily thing. And so medicine and therapy like really helped me through that. I'm also quick to say, like, this is why I make that difference between sort of growth and healing. Like I never really feel like, I think like I'll be healed when I like see Jesus, you know? And even then he might be like, here's your Zoloft, you know, like it's an eternal prescription. Yeah. which I'll be fine
Giver of
with.
all things.
Right? It never expires. But like I'm sort of a lifer. Like this is me. This is part of my makeup. There are times when I manage it better than others. I still go to therapy. I probably always will. Um, I think that my brain is wired in such a way that there are things that I'm great at and ways that this world is like really hard for me. And I see that in some of like different ways in my kids too. And so do I think, if anything, I don't call it like a superpower. I actually hate anxiety. If you could wave a magic wand and be like, give it up. Like some people it kind of it defines them and they're okay with it and they're like, I wouldn't be me without my anxiety. I'm sort of like, here, who wants it? Like take it. But that being said, I can't get rid of it completely. And so I think it has helped me be a little bit more aware and sensitive to what my kids are going through. There are things that my kids will do or say, and it's almost like I can feel it in my body. And I'm like, oh, I know that feeling. Like, you are overwhelmed. You can't control that. What can we do? And my youngest recently said to us, I think I need a therapist.
Wow.
And she like had a list of things and phobias. And she was like, I think I would like to talk to them about this and the stress of school. And I was like, okay, like we will find you help. And so I think like that's healthy, right? Like in our house, it is not weird to go to therapy. And that's something like I'm kind of proud of.
Yeah, because I think for maybe different cultures or different households or generations even, like therapy was like not talked about or not encouraged. And I think especially you as a person of faith, there probably might have been some stigma, maybe even growing up in your household, maybe, of being a Christian, but also having anxiety, right? Like, can you pray the worries away type of thing?
Yeah, yeah. And I took me years to realize I would like have lunch with people who were really loving and well-meaning and dear people. But once I divulged that I had this anxiety disorder, it very much turned to, oh, we're gonna pray about that. And not like I do love prayer, like please pray for me.
Mhm.
But like I want prayer as like praying and showing up alongside of me and like, hey, I see you're like really stressed out and overwhelmed. Like here's a pint of Ben and Jerry's, which is kind of my love language. But not in the sense of like if we just pray hard enough, almost like connecting that to medicine, right? Like if you just do this thing, find the right person, say the right prayer, then you'll be free of it. And I think that's really dangerous. I think people like me are probably susceptible to it, sort of like perfectionist driven. Like if I just do the right thing, I'll get the high grade. And so I think that's like a lifelong thing for me is sort of tearing that down a little bit at a time.
And I love how you highlighted that in the book. So thank you for doing that. Okay, so here's another high anxiety moment. When Tofs went to go get the genetic testing, which also revealed that you have a gene that makes you more likely to be exposed or predisposed to breast cancer and ovarian cancer. You're already dealing with a really stressful season. And now the news of this that you likely were not expecting. Talk about how someone with a history of anxiety, you were able to deal with that. Like, whoa, this is happening all at the same time too.
That was hard. I mean, I think it came in stages. So the first stage was like,
Hello. Oh, closer to my mouth. Okay, thank you.
the first stage was like utter panic. So I remember that when I got the call that he had this BRCA mutation and that I had it too, my first thought was like, it's too late. The cancer is in my body. And like, I'm gonna die. And I remember picturing like a certain cemetery across from the Target that we go to, which Toast loves Target so much. And I was like, that's where I'm gonna end up. And so it went from that, like sort of panic. Then you get ushered into a high risk program where it's just like all these back to back doctor appointments and they're talking about your ovaries and your breasts, and you're just like, oh my gosh. Also in the book, I reveal that on the same day I found out that I was BRCA2 positive, I found out that I was pregnant with Juliet, my youngest, a baby who was never, I mean, I don't mean this like really, but sort of never supposed to be here. Like my husband had his vasectomy scheduled in a month. And
Oh, the collective sigh. Ooh.
um, this is really great. I don't tell this story all the time, but he had his vasectomy scheduled a month from then. My doctor called in the wrong strength of birth control. And because I'm anxious, I was like, well, I'm not going to double up on birth control. Like, I take the light pill. I'll be fine for a month. And this 6-year-old, the one who is telling us exactly what she requires from her therapist, took her shot.
I love it. Life is funny that way.
It is.
Life is funny that way. And God has a sense of humor.
Yeah, and she's totally like the kind of kid who will not be left behind.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry, I don't even remember what the question was because I love that story. I mean, it's funny now. It was terrifying then. Oh, so I found out the results. That's where we were.
Yep.
And so you get kind of moved into this high like surveillance state. And it's really, I had to have the baby first, right? So that held off some decisions. But then it's sort of up to you. It's like you have to get your ovaries out by the time you're like 45 or 50. So I was like, at the time I was like 32-ish, 31. So I was like, okay, I've got time. But the breasts, it's like up to you. It's like, do you want to have your breasts removed? Do you want us to just check them every 6 months and you sit at home and wait to get that email that pops up like, hey, your results are in? And so it was really like a lot of, first I was able to just kind of push it off. I hated those appointments, but I went. And then, it was sort of like, I don't have to choose right now. And then I got to the point where like Paul was sort of gently nudging me. Hey, it's been 4 years. Like, Juliet's not a baby anymore. You're not nursing. Like, what do you think? And so I committed to like fasting and praying. And I remember feeling like for the first time, like maybe God like wants to take care of me in this way. Because I feel like so often God and science are like pitted against each other. And sometimes when I would tell like Christian friends, it would sort of be like, well, you might not need to do all that. Like, you don't necessarily need to get a mastectomy. Like, maybe if you like pray and eat right and do all these things, like you can do that without surgery. But the problem with something like BRCA is like the numbers are still the numbers. So like I could eat salad like for every meal, which I would never do, and I could still get cancer. And so I was like, I'm not gonna do this. And so it was, for me, it was this sense of like whatever your spirituality is, or for me, it was a sense of like, what if God wants to care for me in this way, and that these two things aren't mutually exclusive, which I think is only like, I don't think that's real. Like, I don't think these things are all separate. At least for me, they aren't. And so I made the decision to have a double mastectomy, and I made that decision, scheduled the surgery for April, and COVID hit in March. And so the surgery got pushed back, and it was difficult. But also, it wasn't like I finished and felt happy and like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever. But what I did feel was like a cut of that burden of like always wondering what I was going to do. That part was gone.
Thanks for sharing that aspect. Okay, so the book also delves into the topic of race and you navigating this as a woman of color, and obviously your son being Black as well. And early on in the book, you talk about taking your son to that first doctor's appointment, and the doctor you went to was a doctor of color. And research does show that patients of color who go to see providers or doctors of color tend to have better outcomes and are heard, not dismissed. And I felt like very early on in the book and in the story that was a real turning point, because the doctor sent you home and then they were like, wait, no, let's bring you back for that blood work. And like, let's get that going. Can you kind of talk about like what that meant to you in that moment, to be going through that?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it's amazing. In some ways it's scary, because this mom, she had 2 young kids too and was a doctor. And she wasn't our usual pediatrician, who was also great. she like followed whatever this instinct was in her, like however you want to name it. And she had at first said, you know, you guys go home. I like sort of like in a sense, he doesn't look great, but he's not vomiting. Like there aren't any vitals that are really scaring me. Go home. I'll tell you what, if he doesn't perk up by this afternoon, bring him back in for blood work. Like, you know, Charlottesville is small, so everything's 10, 15 minutes away. Again, me not wanting, like me wanting to be the people pleaser, like never going overboard. I'm like, yes, ma'am, that sounds good. I'll see you. I'll see you later. And we get to the parking lot, and Paul calls us, and he's like, they're calling my number. They're trying to get you back in the office. They want to take his blood now. And like, I don't know what would have happened if she had been like, I know I have this feeling, but my medical training tells me X, Y, and Z. There's no reason to bother them with a blood draw yet, but something about it didn't sit right with her. And that's why she called us in. She's like, I don't know if it was like a mother's hunch or what. I don't feel right. We're gonna take his blood now. They take his blood, and we get a call a few hours later. I'm already at home. He's still sleeping. Like he just never really woke up much that day. And she's like, I don't know if these results are right, but his blood sugar is 27. She's like, I don't even know if that's possible.
Yeah, they like thought it was like an error.
Yeah. And like I remember thinking, like, what do you mean it might be an error? Like, did they drop the vial of blood? Like, I couldn't even wrap my head around it. She was just like, go straight to the ER. And so we did. And so this question of sort of race and medicine is always hard, because I think about, people will say, would you say all Black people need to have Black doctors? I'm like, well, first of all, having that option would be great, right? Like that's not even like really something we can really get into. And I have these wonderful doctors who are not Black and have been so helpful. Like my breast surgeon is, I think for me, sometimes what it is like a mom feeling out where I am. For me, those have tended to be my best doctors. It is like a mom who has this sense, who's like my breast surgeon who sat down with me and has 3 kids and was like, whoa, this came out of left field for you. And like just that sentence for me like opened up so much, because surgeons are kind of, I don't know if there are any surgeons here, but they're kind of known for being like a little bit quirky, not always like people you want to run up and hug. And she was like, she sort of presented like that, like very straight, like pencil skirt. But then when she said that, for me, it just opened up so much. And like, I still have her, I text her random things now, like my breast surgeon, she's like my.
That's amazing. I'm like that too with like my OBGYN. Yeah. It's like, hey, listen, I got a question. And it is really important to be able to have that relationship with a doctor, because that you are able to feel like you can open up to them. Yeah.
And like the other part of that, right, is that the stats don't lie. And so I know that having a doctor, like Black patients having Black doctors, can be really life-saving in certain circumstances.
There was an instance, though, or a few rather, in the book, and one really stood out to me, where I think your husband was joining you at the hospital, and he was dressed up.
Yeah.
he was in slacks and a blazer and a collared shirt, and there was a reason why you and maybe and others around you said, hey, make sure to tell them where he works. Yeah. Can you tell the audience why you did that, and kind of explain more than what you did in the book, on why you felt like that might have been important in this situation?
Yeah. And so for those who aren't familiar with our story, my husband and I met on the trolley at the University of Virginia. And so UVA, the Black community there is pretty tight-knit. Like you sort of know each other and you sort of keep in touch. And one of his friends had also gone there with him in undergrad, was in his fraternity, and had become a doctor. And so one of the things Paul did on our way, I guess, to the hospital, he probably texted or reached out and said, hey, we've got to go to the ER, like any advice, or pray for our son. And one of the things his friend said back immediately was, let them know who you are. And it's almost like code. It's right away. It means tell them that you're faculty now at the University of Virginia. And it's sort of like this thing of pulling out all the stops, like taking all your cards out, because this is your kid's life, and you've got to do whatever it takes. But it's also, it's almost like also counterintuitive or something, because you shouldn't have to do that, right? And what if you don't have that privilege or that class or that clout? And I think that that's what's difficult, because in a city like Charlottesville, most people know Charlottesville now as a place of the Unite the Right rally. And I've always said that there's something about Charlottesville, right, that it happened there. And I think part of what's so hard is like, it's a really like nice, quaint town. And a lot of the people there that look like me don't have, like, they can't be like, hey, I'm faculty at the University of Virginia. They're not, there's not really much of a Black middle class there. And so that hospital, everybody who comes in who's Black, they can't say that, excuse me, and they shouldn't have to, right? And even in our case, when we do, there's no guarantee that it matters. And I think that's always like the conundrum, right? Like if Henry Louis Gates can be arrested at his house, and like if Serena Williams can almost die after giving birth, like, well, who am I, you know?
Did you feel that? Like, who am I to even like need to want to say this?
Yeah, I mean, at that point though, it's like reflex, right? You've sort of been doing it your whole life. And Paul, as a Black male, is even more aware. So he is the one, like I grew up in Ohio, sort of like I come there like a little Black girl going to the big city. And I remember us being married and Paul being like, I'm gonna, like, if we got pulled over, I'm gonna put my hands here, Taylor, look straight ahead. Like, he was coaching me. So even some of the talk that I missed out on growing up in this small town in Ohio, he brought to me. And so he was always aware. And so, I mean, Paul's the type, we had to take our daughter to the hospital recently, and he went and changed and put on a blazer. Wow. And so it's just like, I don't know that he even really thinks of it anymore. You just do it.
We're going to pause our conversation right here. And I know that some of you have been filling out questions to ask Taylor, and we want to make sure that we get to as many of those as we can. Our first question is, how did your faith or other spiritual practices help you with so much uncertainty in your life? Your story is inspiring.
Thank you. I'm just going to pick a person to thank. I don't even know whose question that was. It's like staring at somebody's eyes. Thank you. It's interesting. Like I would find certain passages in the Bible that talked about, this is my go-to. I'm like a sad person. I like sad books. I like sad movies. And I like to take my sadness and go through the Bible and seriously look for the passages that might apply. Because I'm sort of like, what is the lowest, like what's the bottom line here? Because like it's fun to read the Bible when things are great. And I'm always sort of like, man, if I'm really down in the dregs, like apparently like David was at some point, I'm like, take me to the Psalms, take me to Isaiah, take me to the world where the world is falling apart, and let me see what looks like my life. And so I think I did more of that, because I think there is this sort of, you're gonna leave and you're gonna be like, she bashed the church, and that's not what I mean to do. But there was a time where I really came to faith in college where it seemed like things could be so certain, like it's like Christianity and my perfectionism met and like married, and it created this thing of like, if I do the right thing, there will be a good outcome. Like God is smiling on me for doing right. And I don't even think I like verbalized or vocalized that, but I think it was something that I had sort of picked up and internalized. And so mothering Tophs has been a lot, and really all my kids, it's been a lot about like, no, when nothing is going right, there's always something going right if I'm here. But when it seems like the world or your house is on fire, like what is still true and what still applies? And so I am very much into those, like those passages that are like, when you go through the water, I will be with you. When you go through the fire, I'm like, oh, okay, because it feels like I'm drowning, but I'm still here. So there's got to be something true about that.
So good. Thank you. And thank you for that question. All right, the next question is IEPs. Can you talk about those challenges and what you think can be done to help people who have to deal with all the health and education red tape? It's a great question.
So much. And I feel like, so I'll just say my sort of golden rule on this, and this has a lot to do with my personality, my makeup, is that always have someone with you. There were a couple of times, one I detail in the book, well, maybe a couple I detail in the book, of times where if Paul hadn't been there, Paul, if you read the book, is sort of like Steady Eddie. Like, he's sort of my check, like my gut check. Like, is this really bad? Like, do we call 911 or are we cool? And so there were a couple of times where I was so worn down by the process of trying to get Toast the right help that when they said, we can't really name what he has and we can't really serve him in special education anymore, that I think at that point I would have said, okay, like I am done, I've got nothing left, and I would have signed the paper. And thankfully, Paul was there. And I remember this was a school that we really loved, and so that was even harder because I was like, wait, but we're home and you guys aren't gonna serve us anymore? And he said, I think we just need a minute to breathe. And so we pushed our chairs back. I remember crunching on ice, sort of like, I'm done with you all. And we said, we can't sign right now. We'll meet again. And it was like, oh, that's an option. Like, but in that moment, if I didn't have someone with me, I was defeated and I would have checked out. I was tired. And so I try to be careful about my language. I don't mean like you have to have a spouse that you take with you, but an advocate, some kind of mediator, a friend who works in education. So sometimes I'm like, if you're desperate, just pull in somebody off the street and like just feed them lines. Like sometimes for me, it's just literally having somebody next to me where I'm like, Taylor, everything in your head, like this isn't a done deal. You can still back away. And sometimes I need that reminder. So yes, it's great if you can pay or get a great advocate, a lawyer. I've had a friend who's had to lawyer up and give a lot of her paycheck. If you're able to do that, then it's worth it. Also, I realize that not all of us can necessarily do that. So I would say like total buddy system. Don't go alone because the gaslighting is real.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. A few more questions here. Have you continued to research, study, and follow genetic health developments since your book experiences?
A little bit. A little bit. I'm always like curious if I hear stories on NPR. I do think we'll know a lot more in our lifetime. I have to admit, I had a friend who was also BRCA positive and had the opportunity, with the way that she conceived, she was able to ensure that her daughter didn't have the mutation. And so those are those moments where I have to be like, I'm really happy for her. And that's really hard for me because I'll always think of the day I found out the results, knowing that I was pregnant. And like, you can call it whatever, like, but I felt in my gut that it was a girl. And I had this moment of like, I didn't even get the chance. Like I didn't have that option to say, okay, I know I have this mutation. It's a 50-50 chance of passing it down. Maybe like we will make sure we hold off on another kid. And so, there's grace, right? All things will be covered. Like I don't wake up in a sweat worrying about that. But it is hard sometimes, like to learn about sort of these things in genetics that you feel like maybe you missed out on. But I think that's true for so many people who have chronic conditions or things that they're battling. Part of the progress, right, is that you might miss out on some of the progress.
This is a great final question to end on. What did you learn most about yourself during the timeline of the book and writing the book? She said, oh my gosh.
I learned that I can be super like tunnel vision focused when I'm on deadline. I learned that I work best by really like, my husband painted a dry erase wall in our office during the time of the book. And through that, I was able to write on the wall, like very Jackson Pollock style. And so I really continue, I think, through my kids and trying to figure out how they best learn and move in the world. It also forces you to look at like how you best learn and move in the world. And a lot of times, I grew up in the 1980s where it was like nobody had time to talk about like all your learning differences, and now that we do have more time, I think a lot more about that. And I think it's made me just more sensitive, like hopefully like a tiny bit of a better human, like still a very obsessive human, but I consider more like how the world might be hard for people just like it's hard for me in a lot of ways.
Yeah. What's next?
What's
Is
next?
there like another book you got going on?
Well, let me say there's not another baby.
Okay, good.
So we did have that surgery.
I was like, so Paul went and got
was
it
a
done. Okay,
success.
good, good.
They test you, it's fine. But seriously, I still have hanging questions. I still have to decide when to get my ovaries removed because that's how BRCA works. So that's a thing. And yeah, right now I'm in a mode where we're sort of on another diagnostic journey with another kid, just different symptoms. And so I don't know if you've ever felt in your life sort of like, wait, I just did this thing. Did I fail the test because I'm doing this thing again? That's the mode I'm in my life. And I almost feel like I need to be like a total stay-at-home mom again to try to heal this. And so that's a very strange, I just texted my husband last night, like, Paul, I just wrote the book on this. How is this happening again? And so I'm just like, oh, okay, we're back in the space of unknown, which you would probably say, like, Taylor, you're sort of like an expert on this, but I actually feel like, what the heck? Like, there's no way. Like, I passed the test. But we're there again. And so again, we talked about this a little bit of like, what season are you in? And so whereas before there was almost this push to put out a second book or put out a book proposal, I've pulled back. I'm teaching online for Johns Hopkins. I still love to like read and have like a foot in the writing world, but to be honest, I feel very far from sort of having a writing schedule because, I'm like, we're back kind of, I feel like we're back here with Toph being 2, only just a different situation. And so I think I'm learning that like, oh, it's not just something that you check off and then life returns to normal. Like maybe this is part of adulting.
Ugh.
Sorry. No, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
It'll be good.
Okay. Adulting is hard though. It is. I say that to my mom all the time. I was like, why did I sign up for this?
Yeah.
But that was actually my next question, not knowing that you are kind of revisiting some of the same stuff you did with Toast. I had written down here, life has a funny way of being exactly what you wanted it to be, but also not what you had expected. Yeah. At what point, or are you there yet, coming to terms with the reality that Toast's life may not be what you had thought it was going to be?
I am, so that little girl in me who had to have straight A's and who got a scholarship by the grace of God to go to UVA. And, I'm not saying she's not there anymore. I still fight that sort of type A tendency, like, who's the smartest in the room? Like, they're the best. There's still part of me there, and those expectations, they have changed. Like I am into wholeness and health and like all the things that are gonna sound a little woo-woo. I still don't like meditation, but like I can't sit still for it. But like, yes, I'm just sort of like, dude, like Toast, I think you would be a great DJ. Like go DJ somewhere or he wants to go to that New York Film Academy. That I'm not even sure if it's legit or if it's a scam. If anybody's gone there, please talk to me. But I'm like, yes, maybe go to New York when you're 18 and do the Film Academy. Like my expectations have shifted.
That's good. Okay. This is the last question, I promise, Tim, as we wrap it up. It's been such a fun evening. I know you're a big ice cream lover.
Yeah.
And your Instagram handle is like right for ice cream or something like that.
True.
What's your favorite flavor?
Oh my gosh. There's so many. Like, do you mean like by brand or?
I mean, if you love your ice cream. I mean, if you could have like a scoop or a bowl in front of you right now, what would be in that bowl?
Okay, I got this.
Okay.
I grew up in Ohio. There's a company out of Ohio called Grater's Ice Cream.
Amazing.
You know it?
My parents live in Cincinnati. Who else has had it?
Yes, so good.
It's a French pot method, which is like, I'm pretty sure it's just like buttermilk and chocolate and sugar. Like, I don't even know. Like, it's like twice as many calories as anything else you can find.
Twice as good.
I do not care. The chocolate is like smooth and like boulder-like.
Okay.
And like if you try to eat it with a plastic spoon from the grocery store, because say you buy it and you're sitting in your car and you don't want to wait till you get home, I've heard that happens. It will break. Like you will break the neck of the spoon. and it'll be a violent disappointment.
Yeah. We don't want there to be
Oh,
a
sorry,
disappointment.
I didn't even get past the brand. I get
Yeah.
carried away.
Okay.
Peanut butter chip.
Okay.
Because
Peanut
a
butter
lot
chip.
of peanut butter chip ice creams are like a chocolate base with little bits of peanut butter. I do not like chocolate ice cream. This is a peanut butter base with smooth milk chocolate.
That sounds amazing. If I could plug a good place for you to try ice cream here in Des Moines while you're visiting.
Yeah.
Up the street, not too far, Black Cat Ice Cream. Oh, we got a round of applause. I don't know who is, driving you around Des Moines,
Yeah.
but like you need to go.
Hey, Tim, we got another stop.
Okay. Take her to Black Cat. They've been on like the Food Network and like they've won all sorts of prizes. It's
Wow.
amazing. So Taylor, thank you so much
you.
for sharing your heart, sharing your story. Give her a round of applause. Thank you so much for being
you.
here. This was an amazing AViD season. This wraps it up. Taylor, we saved the best for last. We also want to send a big thank you to the library staff and the Library Foundation for making this all possible. So thank you again.
Thank you.